My parents told me they would skip my wedding unless I invited my brother. And somehow, after a lifetime of watching them choose him first, they still expected me to believe this wasn't favoritism. I was 27 years old. My brother was 36. 9 years separated us, but emotionally, it felt like we had grown up on completely different planets. I don't remember being close to him as a child. Actually, I barely remember him being there at all. Whenever I brought that up to my parents, they always gave me the same answer. You two will get closer when you're older. I waited. We got older. Nothing changed. If anything, things got worse. Every interaction with him seemed to follow the same script. He would say something cruel. I would react. He would somehow convince everyone that I was the unreasonable one. And my parents would shrug. That's just how he is. As if being someone's brother came with a permanent exemption from apologizing. As if being rude was a personality trait instead of a choice. I learned pretty early that there were two sets of rules in my family. One for me, and one for him. If I was late, my parents noticed. If I forgot something, I heard about it. If I made a mistake, there was a conversation. With my brother, they were just happy if he showed up. That difference became impossible to ignore as we got older. Then, a couple of years ago, everything became much more serious. My brother's longtime partner accused him of sexual assault and of recording intimate encounters without consent. The allegations were horrifying. She had been part of our family for most of my life. Even though she and I weren't especially close, she had always been kind to me. She remembered birthdays. She asked how I was doing. She treated me with more warmth than my own brother sometimes did. So hearing those accusations made my stomach turn. There was an ongoing civil case between them, and I wasn't interested in pretending I knew everything that had happened behind closed doors. But I knew enough to understand why I didn't feel comfortable around him. And that mattered. Especially now, because I was getting married. My fiancé, and I wanted a very small wedding. 35 people. That was it. No enormous guest list. No giant ballroom packed with distant relatives. Just the people we genuinely wanted around us when we promised to spend our lives together. I did invite my brother. That part matters. I didn't secretly cut him out. I didn't send him some dramatic message saying he wasn't welcome. He received an invitation like everyone else. And then he did absolutely nothing with it. The RSVP deadline came. And went. Weeks passed. Still nothing. Almost 2 months after the deadline, my parents asked me about it. I told them he hadn't responded. They contacted him. And suddenly I heard from my brother. Except instead of apologizing for ignoring the invitation, he blamed me. Apparently, the RSVP process had been too confusing. I remember staring at the message thinking, how? 34 other people had somehow managed to figure it out. If he'd been confused, he could have called, texted, asked me, asked our parents, asked literally anyone. But he didn't. Then came the second demand. He wanted a +1. His girlfriend had been dating him for around 6 months. She was more than 10 years younger than him. And apparently she was pregnant. My wedding had 35 guests. It wasn't an open invitation to bring whoever someone happened to be dating. So I said no. And then I said something I probably should have said years earlier. I didn't want my brother there. Not because I wanted revenge. Not because I wanted to punish him. Because I was uncomfortable around him. And this was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. I wanted to be able to look around the room without wondering what he might say. Or do. Or whether I would spend the entire day managing his behavior while everyone else celebrated. My friends already knew how uncomfortable he made me. So when I told my parents, I expected an argument. Instead, they surprised me. At first. They said they were disappointed, but ultimately, they would respect my decision. I thought maybe, just maybe, they understood. Then, with roughly 2 months until the wedding, everything changed. My parents called me. They weren't coming. Not unless my brother came too. I remember the silence after they said it. There are some moments when your brain doesn't immediately process what you've heard. You hear the words. You understand every individual word. But somehow the sentence doesn't make sense. My wedding. My parents. They won't come. Unless I invite him. I felt something heavy settle in my chest. I asked them why. They told me I was being immature. They said disinviting my brother was going too far. They said I was being unreasonable. And all I could think was, why is it always me? Why is his comfort always something everyone has to protect? Why is mine negotiable? I wasn't a parent, so I tried to understand their perspective. I genuinely did. Maybe they felt caught in the middle. Maybe they thought a family wedding wasn't supposed to happen with one child excluded. Maybe they believed they were doing the right thing. But there was something I couldn't shake. They had spent my entire life minimizing my feelings whenever my brother was involved. And now, on my wedding day, they were doing it again. Only this time, there was nowhere left for me to hide from it. This wasn't about a childhood argument. It wasn't about who got the bigger bedroom. It wasn't about a forgotten birthday. This was my wedding. The day I was supposed to walk toward the person I loved most in the world. And my parents were making their attendance conditional on someone else's invitation. The person they were asking me to prioritize had barely bothered to RSVP. That fact kept circling around in my head. He couldn't even respond to the invitation. But somehow, I was the selfish one. I eventually turned to my fiancé. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't tell me what I should do. He just sat there while I tried to explain why this hurt so much. Because the truth was, I wasn't only angry. I was grieving. I had always believed my parents were my safe place. I thought I could tell them anything. I thought they knew me. I thought they would understand that I wasn't trying to destroy the family. I was trying to protect one day that mattered enormously to me. Instead, I was beginning to realize something terrifying. Maybe my parents didn't see the family the way I did. Maybe, in their version of the family, my brother had always occupied the center. And I had spent years convincing myself that I was standing beside him, when maybe I had actually been standing behind him the entire time. And now my wedding had forced everyone to stop pretending. The closer the wedding got, the more impossible the situation became. Eventually, someone suggested family therapy. My parents, my fiancé, and me. One room. For people. One enormous problem sitting between us. I walked into that session determined to stay calm. I wasn't going there to scream. I wasn't going there to attack anyone. I wanted to explain myself. I wanted them to understand one simple thing. On my wedding day, I expected my comfort to matter. That's all. I didn't ask them to hate my brother. I didn't ask them to choose me forever. I wasn't demanding they cut him out of their lives. I just didn't want him at my wedding. I sat there and carefully explained that. My voice stayed calm. My fiancé stayed beside me. And then my mother looked at me and said, "You are wrong."
Just like that.
No hesitation. No attempt to understand where I was coming from.
Wrong.
The conversation spiraled almost immediately. They called me selfish, entitled, disrespectful. My decision, they said, was an insult to them. I listened. I tried to answer. But every time I thought we were getting somewhere, the conversation became another argument about my character. My fiancé and I kept our composure. My parents didn't. Their voices rose. At one point, they even mocked my therapist. And then my mother said something that hurt more than almost everything else. She criticized the way I was handling my wedding. I had always been detail-oriented. It was something I genuinely liked about myself. It helped me at work. It helped with my hobbies. I liked knowing where things were. I liked planning. I liked making sure the little details were right. But my mother turned that into a criticism. She said my obsession with all those little wedding details didn't bode well for my marriage. That sentence stayed with me. Not because it was true. Because she knew exactly what she was criticizing. She wasn't talking about table arrangements.
She was talking about me.
The person I was. The qualities I had always been proud of. And suddenly, I didn't feel like I was sitting in therapy with people who knew me. I felt like I was defending myself in front of strangers. When the session ended, my fiancé and I left. I sat in the car afterward, staring through the windshield. Neither of us said much. There are moments when silence says more than conversation ever could. I knew something had changed. I just didn't know what it meant yet. Then I made a decision. I contacted every member of my extended family who was coming to the wedding.
Aunts.
cousins, everyone. I told them my parents might not attend, and I told them why. I wasn't trying to turn anyone against my parents. I wasn't asking them to pick sides. I just didn't want people showing up to my wedding wondering where my parents were or assuming I had done something terrible. Then, the messages started coming in, one after another. Support, understanding,
Love.
people I had never considered especially close were telling me they were coming. Not for my parents. Not for my brother. For me and my fiancé. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until I read those messages. For years, I had felt like the difficult one, the sensitive one, the one who needed to let things go. And suddenly, people were saying, "We understand. We're with you. We'll be there." I started checking in with those relatives more often. I realized I had spent so much time trying to maintain the relationship with my parents that I had overlooked some of the other people who genuinely cared about me. About a week later, my mother called. They had changed their minds. They wanted to come. My dad, apparently, had made it clear he would support his wife. And then came another sentence I wasn't expecting. I had ruined the experience for them. My wedding. The wedding they had threatened to skip unless I invited my brother. Somehow, I had ruined it. I didn't know what to say. So, I stopped trying to control the situation. The wedding was now 2 weeks away. I couldn't control whether my parents would behave. I couldn't control whether my brother would appear. I couldn't control what anyone said. But I could control one thing. My focus. I was getting married. And I wanted to remember that. My friends were coming. My extended family was coming. My future in-laws had stepped up in ways I hadn't expected. My future mother-in-law checked on me every week. She asked how I was doing. She cared about how I was feeling. And I couldn't help noticing the contrast. My own mother wasn't checking in. My future mother-in-law was. That contrast hurt. But it also gave me perspective. I didn't need to spend the final 2 weeks fighting with my parents. I needed to get married. A few days before the wedding, I took one precaution. I sent the venue information about my brother. His ex-partner had publicly accused him of serious misconduct, and his photo had appeared in a national publication connected to those allegations. I wanted the venue staff to know what he looked like. Not because I expected him to come. Honestly, I was about 95% sure he wouldn't. He had a history of skipping events I wanted him to attend. And this wedding was being held in a remote location. Getting there wasn't exactly effortless. Still, I wanted the venue prepared. Then, the wedding day arrived. And my brother never showed. That should have been the moment I finally relaxed. But I couldn't, because my parents were there. And I had spent months wondering what they might do. Would they make a scene? Would they say something? Would they try to force another confrontation? Would they somehow turn the day back into a fight about my brother? Instead, they were quiet, withdrawn. They didn't cause a scene. They didn't make an announcement. They simply existed at the edges of the day. And somehow, I was still tense. Every time I saw them, a tiny alarm went off in the back of my mind. I kept thinking, is something about to happen? But nothing did. The ceremony happened. The photographs happened.
People laughed.
People hugged me. The day kept moving forward. And slowly, something strange happened. I started enjoying myself. I looked around and saw people who had come because they loved me. My fiancé was there. My friends were there. My extended family was there. The people who mattered were there. And for a few hours, the family conflict became background noise. Until eventually the day was over. I went to change out of my wedding dress. And that's when I realized just how much stress I had been carrying. I was covered in hives. My body had apparently been holding onto every ounce of anxiety I'd tried to ignore. But when I looked at the photographs later, something surprised me. I looked happy, relaxed, like I had actually enjoyed my wedding. And I did, despite everything. I loved the pictures. I loved the memories. Every vendor had done an incredible job. The day I had spent months worrying about had actually become one of the happiest days of my life. And then came the question I couldn't avoid. Where did that leave my parents? Before the wedding, I would have told you my parents were my best friends. That is what made everything so painful. I wasn't entering this situation believing they were terrible parents. I wasn't secretly waiting for proof that they didn't love me. I genuinely trusted them. I thought I could tell them anything. I thought they understood me. But after the wedding, that relationship felt completely different. Therapy didn't last much longer. Eventually, in one of our final sessions, I told my mother something I'd been carrying around for years. I told her I felt like she and my father had always treated my brother and me differently. I gave examples. I explained the pattern. If I needed to show up somewhere early, they expected it. If my brother showed up at all, they were happy. If I made a mistake, it mattered. When he made one, there was always an explanation. And then there was something even bigger. I told her that if I had gotten pregnant at 25 by a man 11 years older whom I'd met on a first date, my parents wouldn't have reacted the same way they reacted to my brother's situation, especially considering everything they had invested in my education. I knew exactly how they would have reacted to me, but with him, they were delighted. That realization was devastating, because it meant the favoritism wasn't something I had imagined. It wasn't just childhood insecurity. It wasn't me being overly sensitive. I had simply spent years explaining away something that had been sitting in front of me the entire time. And then my brother got married, only a day or two after my wedding.
Nearby.
A very small ceremony with a justice of the peace. His fiancée was several months pregnant. My parents attended. Of course they did. And I remember thinking about the contrast. They had almost skipped my wedding because I refused to invite him. Then almost immediately afterward, they attended his. It wasn't even the wedding itself that hurt the most. It was what it represented. My parents and I had different values, different expectations, maybe even different definitions of what family meant. I had always believed love meant respecting boundaries. They seemed to believe family loyalty meant showing up for someone regardless of what happened. And somewhere along the way, I realized those two ideas were no longer compatible. I stopped calling. I stopped texting. Not as some dramatic punishment. I just didn't know what to say anymore. There was nothing left to explain. I had spent months trying to make them understand me. And eventually, I accepted that understanding wasn't something I could force. There was also the issue of money. My parents had paid for my wedding. And some people pointed out that because they were paying, they believed they had the right to decide who attended. I wrestled with that idea too. A lot. Because yes, they had contributed financially. But I couldn't accept the idea that paying for my wedding automatically meant they owned the guest list. If I threw a birthday party for a friend and I paid for everything, would that give me the right to invite someone my friend was deeply uncomfortable around? Of course not. That would be cruel. The money shouldn't have changed that. And I told my parents something very clearly. If I had known from the beginning that accepting their financial help meant my brother's attendance was a condition, I would never have accepted the money. Eventually, even they admitted that putting that condition on the money afterward was unfair. That didn't fix everything, but at least it confirmed something for me. I hadn't been imagining the problem. The wedding was over. I was married. And, strangely enough, married life was wonderful. My husband was amazing. The people who had stood beside me during the hardest part of the wedding were still there. My friends were still there. My extended family was still there. And I began realizing that family isn't always about the people you've known the longest. Sometimes it's about the people who make you feel safe. The people who listen. The people who don't make you earn their support. The people who don't force you to choose between your own comfort and their approval. Looking back, I think the wedding didn't destroy my relationship with my parents. It revealed it. That's the part one still struggle with. Because I can't reconcile the parents I grew up with and the people I saw during those 9 months. They're the same people, but I see them differently now. Maybe that's what growing up actually is sometimes. Not realizing your parents are perfect. Not realizing they're terrible either. Just realizing they're human. And sometimes, realizing the people you love can have values you can no longer live with. I don't know what happens next. Maybe someday we'll talk again. Maybe we'll repair some of this. Maybe we won't. Right now, I don't text them. I don't call them. And I'm okay with that. Because for the first time, I'm not spending every waking minute trying to convince someone that my feelings are legitimate. My wedding was supposed to be about starting a new chapter. And in a strange way, that's exactly what happened. I started a new chapter. Just not the one I expected. I married the person I love. I surrounded myself with people who genuinely wanted to celebrate with me. And I learned that sometimes protecting your peace means accepting that someone else is going to be disappointed. Even if that someone is your parent. Even if they call you selfish. Even if they tell you you're wrong. Even if they make you question yourself. You can still say no. You can still have boundaries. And you can still walk down the aisle. The funny thing is, when I look back at the wedding photos now, I don't see the arguments. I don't see the therapy session. I don't see the missed RSVP. I don't see the family drama. I see myself smiling. I see my husband. I see the people who showed up. And I see someone who, despite everything, finally stopped trying to make herself smaller just to keep everyone else comfortable. Maybe that's the real ending. Not that my parents finally understood. Not that my brother apologized. Not that everyone suddenly became one happy family. None of that happened. The ending was much simpler. I chose the life I wanted. And for once, I didn't ask my family for permission. Because sometimes the hardest part of setting a boundary isn't saying no. It's accepting that the people who taught you to feel guilty for saying no may never understand why you had to say it. And that's okay. My wedding happened. My brother didn't show. My parents stayed. The day went on. And somehow, after all the fear, all the arguments, all the tears, I ended up exactly where I was supposed to be. Married.
Happy.
And finally beginning to understand that being loved doesn't mean being controlled. Sometimes, love is simply being allowed to choose your own life. And that's what I finally chose.